Hello, and welcome back to the Comic Books Matter podcast. I'm your host, Jesse, and with me today is the writer and creator of the hit Kickstarter now, Twin Blades. It's Jared Lujan. Sorry about that.
Fine.
How are you tonight, man?
I'm doing well. I am having a celebratory beer, so I'm great.
It is the eve of the final day of your Kickstarter. Evening of the final day, the night of the final day, I guess. And it's one that kept on coming across my feed, and I was like, I need to back this. I need to back this. But I just kept on like, I got time, and then all of a sudden, like, I saw you post like, hey, we only got like a week left. I'm like, oh, I need to back this right now. I need to get into this.
Yeah, that's sort of like the whole reasoning between spamming Twitter is like, hey, this is definitely still a thing. You should back it now.
Yeah, and in the idea of Twin Blades, I because mostly like you completely sold me just off the artwork. Because I always had the idea of magic or elemental blades that do different things as a cool concept. Like I used to write stories about that kind of stuff because that's the kind of cool ideas that like always came up in my head, because I'm like, why isn't more people done this? And you're doing it. So
Right.
I'm like, oh, the stuff I used to like think was awesome, you're making it into a comic. Of course I need to read this.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the cool things about I think I'm always like sort of fascinated with the elemental side of fantasy and magic and things. And that's kind of the cool thing with doing swords directly related to a god, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Xolotl is the guy, he's like a soul guide of the dead in Aztec mythology, but he's also like the god of fire and lightning. So we got to be able to, we though both Julio and I, the artist of the book, were like, oh man, that would be dope if like there was literally flames and lightning coming off of these giant makuohitls, you know. So yeah, it looks fantastic. It's really cool.
And for me, the idea of powers and weapons always is cool because it adds an extra oomph to
Yeah.
all the combat and all the fights. Using elemental powers and stuff has always been in comics and in media and legend and all that stuff. But
Right.
I think something about combining weapons isn't done enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the sort of I like lore that has sort of a weaponry that's held in sort of like a legendary status.
Yeah,
And so you know, this one was my sort of approach to it at first was kind of like I guess like Excalibur, but
yeah.
Mexican as hell, you know. So,
And honestly, I rather read that story than another Excalibur King Arthur story. The only one that has any interest in me right now is just the Karen Gillan and like what's it called off the top of my head? My brain just lost it. But he's doing one, but it's like it's very evil kind of Excalibur, which that's fun because we need more England being the bad guys. But yeah, the idea of just learning different legends and history and lore in this kind of story is so much fun, and I'm excited to read it.
yeah, thank you. We you know, Julio and I are both really passionate about the history and the culture behind the book and the mythology and sort of telling it both in an honest way that is respectful of our culture and our ancestry,
Yeah,
but also is a way that's sort of fun and can introduce people to the book and to the mythology and the greater culture behind it. And I think we did a pretty good job balancing those two things out. I'm really proud with how the book came out. I'm really proud with how the mythology comes across.
yeah, and honestly, that's one of, I think, the best ways currently, because just the way, at least in American society, how it's the best way to learn about different cultures is to find the entertainment made for
Yeah.
those cultures, because we don't get taught any of it, and if we do, it's very like white.
Yeah. The thing about the twin blades is what I was really when I was first kind of workshopping the book, I was really sort of thinking about doing it in a colonial period.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think that's like a concept that I might come back to if I ever do more with the twin blades. But you know, I was like, man, I don't want to make this a story about colonization or anything like that right now. I just want to have fun. I just
Yeah,
want
no,
to
for sure.
do Mexicans with swords. And so that's kind of how we ended up, and in a way that's really authentic and really honest to God. Like, so much care went into trying to produce this in a way that I thought wouldn't denigrate our own culture. And I'm pretty yeah. So like, I mean, I already said I was proud of the book, but yeah, that's one of those things that I got really hung up on, is that, and we did it with an all team too.
Yeah.
You know, everybody on the team. Three of us are Mexican. You know, we Gabby, our letterer, is the only one who doesn't come from a Mexican background, and so it was a really cool story that kind of unfolded.
And how long have you been like kind of working on this idea? Like when did it start festering in your head?
So I've had like the idea of the twin blades for a while. Like the idea of the the legendary. So let me back up a little bit. Xolotl, the god that I mentioned of, like he
Yeah.
actually, the myth is that he didn't sacrifice himself at the creation of the fifth sun. He wept, and he wept so much that his eyes literally fell out of his head. And I had an idea that would take that myth and turn it into two magical swords like years ago.
Hmm.
And I just kind of sat on it because I had the concept, but I didn't really have any, like, the style. I didn't have a plot. I didn't have characters. And I just kind of backseated it for a while. And then right after, and it was in August, where I was really trying to do my next, I was trying to start figuring out my next steps. At the time, we were about a month out from Dryfoot's release. It's Dryfoot number one's release. And I had no comic work, and so I was just trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I tweeted out something like that I wanted to give Mexicans with swords, and the next thing I knew, it was like blowing up. Everybody was asking me about it all the time. So I ended up, Twin Blades is actually like the combination of like two stories that I had at the time. Like I had this magical sword concept, and then I also had like a slew of stories that I really want to kind of touch on later on.
Yeah.
And one of them I sort of just kind of retrofitted for the Twin Blades. And yeah, so it's literally been a concept for less than a year. I wrote the script. We didn't start art on it until November of 2020, but I wrote the script probably late August, and then had some friends read it, give me notes, and then I worked on that, and then we sent it back and had them kind of sign off on it right around in October. And so we got it in, and we've been working on it since.
That's a crazy turnaround on that. And then I know I just got the latest update that you guys are almost done inking the entire book, and then coloring is like next, and then lettering is like right behind it. So you guys are like on top of it to be done in like a month or so, it seems like.
Yeah, I'm hope so. I really hope so. I like don't I'm a really productive person. Like I really
Yeah.
think I try to stay as busy as I can. Unfortunately, I sometimes bite off more than I can chew, and so I think I kind of did that with this. I started production on my next Kickstarter one shot last week. Oh, that's a lie. April 1st is when we started it, and I launched. So I'd worked on Twin Blades the month before Dryfoot started releasing. Dryfoot dropped 4 issues. The trade came out in February, and like 2 weeks after that, we launched the Kickstarter for Twin Blades. So I've been doing that for the last 30 days. And then after that, I'm right back in production on my next Kickstarter. And so it's just been kind of a real crazy thing. But my whole schedule for this year is nuts, so it makes sense. I shouldn't say that like it's a bad thing, you know.
No, no, but it's true that you like there is a point where you're like, ooh, I am doing too much. But in a year, like in the last 2 years that we've kind of had, too much is maybe a good thing right now, because it kind of keeps your mind off some stuff, and also it keeps you like focused in on like the end goal of everything. And
Yeah,
with a world that's wide open, it's easy to get distracted and kind of get off the path of working on like your end goals. So yeah, I think it's good to be super busy, but I also understand how stressful that can be.
yeah, and I think like every writer I know would kill to be like, man, I'm so busy. You know,
Yeah.
that's the dream. And I'm maybe not, paying my bills with it, but it's definitely one of those things where everyone I know and a bunch of people I know that, I'm not by any, I'm not like Donnie Cates or anything, but I know people that haven't, that are chasing after what I have. Like I know like a dozen people that would kill to have what I've got.
Yeah.
And I need to keep that in mind. I would have killed to have what I have right now 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that it's a hard slog, but you got to remember that to be grateful for it and just kind of keep going.
And you talked about how like Twin Blades is a combination of two stories, and I love as a fellow like another writer when you're missing halves of things and you realize, oh wait, both halves are right here and I could just combine them.
Right.
But it makes me curious because you talked about maybe doing like a prequel Twin Blades that's more set in a colonial era. Would you ever see Twin Blades as kind of like an anthology series with other people getting the swords?
Man, I didn't. That's a good idea, though. um, I I think like a lot of it that people have asked if I planned on doing like a sequel to the Twin Blades, and my answer is almost always no. Like I really like the idea of doing the one shot, and the whole thing about the Twin Blades is that it's existed for, according to Aztec mythology,
Yeah.
the they should have existed for all of existence, right? Since
Yeah.
the creation of the sun, these things have existed. And so I was really interested in doing a story, maybe set back in time, with in colonial area, because I'm interested in that time period.
Yeah.
But there's also like Mexico has two really big revolutions, and I'm kind of just interested in what that would look like. Where would these two magics Macuajito be in that sort of a time period? But the idea of an anthology is very enticing, as a matter of fact. Maybe that, yeah, I hadn't thought of it, but I definitely think it's a good idea. That's probably something to consider for the future.
Yeah, and I think with anything that deals with history in this way too works best in anthology. I always go back to one of my favorite like long running history type comics, and that's like American Vampires. Like, yeah, it has one long main series that was going for a long time, but now really become an anthology of just different decades, and then continuing the story in that decade, and different characters come in and stuff like that. And I love that idea. So I would love to see more like historical comic fiction that is in that kind of format of just telling stories in different eras about similar subjects.
Yeah, and I like the idea of so I'm like a really big Assassin's Creed fan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I like the idea of taking historical fiction and introducing something just crazy into it. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, Assassin's Creed does aliens and stuff like that. So that's definitely stuff that catches my interest. Maybe one day, man. That sounds like a really good idea. I'm probably
I'll
going to
I'll
scribble
I'll,
that down tonight.
I'll be there to the back as soon as I see it.
I will make sure and mention that it was you're responsible for it.
To go even further back in time though in your history, where did comic books show up in your life? That's the key question I want to know right now.
So I'm kind of a weird case. As a matter of fact, I read comics. I was really into manga as a kid.
Yeah.
I had I got into manga at at like 14, 15, and all my friends were reading it, and I just kind of fell into it. And I went from manga into Western comics, and usually that pipeline, at least in the United States, is reversed, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Honestly, I'm
yeah,
not sure nowadays if it is, because it feels like more and more that I'm seeing more kids like in the comic shop in the manga section than
yeah,
looking at the wall.
yeah. Well, manga's so popular. It's
Yeah.
so popular, and
Yeah. It's huge
uh,
now.
yeah, and so like I went from that to comics to Western comics, and I think stylistically that comes across in my work kind of intensely. But so I was in comics on and off from when I was like 15 until I was 25. Um, I love comics, but the one I didn't have a comic shop where I grew up.
Yeah.
I was buying trades whenever I did have comics, and then when I moved to where I live now for college, I was buying comics at a shop in floppies, but I was buying mostly big two stuff, and I was going broke because
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's big two comics.
It's a lot of books for a
Yeah,
lot of money.
so I quit buying comics because I was going broke. Like I was flat out going broke. And then when I was 25, I went back to I have a job that I actually make decent money at, and my bills were paid. And I was like, man, I really miss comics. I want to get back into it. And that I was like, I'm not going to do this thing where I spend all this money every week on big two comics. I want to do independent stuff.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it's kept me ever since then. I haven't been able to get out ever since then. Independent comics is like the not even just some of my favorite storytelling period, but just has like the best community of all time. And
Yeah, it seems like a very nice, seems like a very welcoming and like supportive community in that way compared to some
yeah,
of the big two kind of stable houses. And even then, like it seems like a lot of the older big two people have got out of the big two and like now doing independence, and they're like, hey, can you make room for us? It's like, you didn't make room for us. So
yeah. I think the thing that really like cracks me up about big two books is like the difference between the big two and independent comics is that like big two people, the fans of the big two, I think, and this is true for Star Wars too. I love Star Wars to death, but nobody hates Star Wars as much
yeah.
as Star Wars
Yep.
fans. And that's sort of the same truth for the big two stuff, is that people in on those sides really like really argue and spend their time on social media getting mad at each other. And indie comics is the total opposite. Everybody's just like, hey, I really liked this book, and then you have 5 or 6 people replying like, yeah, that book rules, have you read such and such, and
Yeah. And every
it's
once in a
it's
while
crazy.
you'll get like that the bad person making an independent book. You're like, we're not gonna buy that one, right? And everyone's like, yeah, we're not gonna buy
Yeah,
that one.
yeah, exactly.
Except for every once in a while where that person somehow sells out. But that's beside the point. Um but so my curiosity then goes to like, is there a certain comic or manga that hit you so hard that you decided like, I want to get to do this, I want to get to the place where I can do this more often or for a living?
Yeah, no, there's not a manga. Man, I actually got to get back into reading manga now that I'm thinking about it. The comic that I think really changed how I perceive comics. We are just talking about big two comics, and this is one, but um, it's because of what its message. The was Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns.
Mm-hmm.
I also like Frank Miller's Daredevil Born Again. To me, those two were like mind blowing because Miller Miller does what I really like, which he kind of brings it down to the street, and he makes it
Yeah.
really a dirty, grimy story. And I don't, agree with all the themes in Dark Knight Returns, obviously, but I like that it kind of dirtied up Batman a little bit, and
Yeah.
that's kind of the point. Nobody walks away from that story squeaky clean. And but in terms of like an indie book, I think the indie book that blew my mind, like, and it's not even that indie, it's Image, right? But the one that really just took my breath away was East of West.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
East of West, I thought is probably my favorite comic of all time. It's just so genius in its world building and its structure and everything. And then I have 2 books that are deep cuts that I think, but Submerged from Vault Comics, uh, amazing, and that was the book that I think really changed what I thought stories could be in comics. Like Frank Miller was kind of like, yeah, you can dirty it up a little bit, you can dirty up the mythos, but Submerged was something wildly different that I'd never seen before. And then the other one that really was, I think I judge myself by whether or not I think that I write anything as good as this book, but it's not fair because the book is genius. But is These Savage Shores?
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think that book changed the way I view writing. To tell you the truth, it is a masterpiece, and I always like with Twin Blades. I was like getting really hard on myself because I'm like, this isn't nearly as good as These Savage Shores, and I kept having to tell myself like, it doesn't have to be, like That's a story about a deep cut story about like who we are as people, and you're writing a story that's supposed to be lighthearted and fun. It's okay, but yeah, man. Those two books, I think Submerged was one of the very first books I bought when I was getting back into comics, and I still like that's one of those books where I think about it as like a turning point in who I am as a writer and what my ambitions were.
Yeah.
Every writer in the world wants to write for Marvel and DC at some point, but when it was coming down to like what kind of stories I really wanted to tell, it was okay. It doesn't have to be a superhero story. It doesn't have to be your take on your take on a superhero story. It can be this really deep emotional analysis of a human being and yourself, and it blew my mind. It's an amazing book.
Yeah, and I haven't read Submerged, but talking about these Savage Shores, Rom came on like a whirlwind for me because all of a sudden everyone was talking about him. He was writing Justice League Dark, and I read. I will be the first to admit I read more DC than I do Marvel, not because I think Marvel's quality is worse. It's just I'm more interested. I'm more interested in the lines a little tighter for me, so
Right.
I can read those a bit better. But I ordered right away. I ordered these Savage Shores in blue and green from my local comic shop, and I'm like, okay, I'll get these like in a month, and then I'll read them. It'll be a great time. I got them like the next week. They just somehow just got there really fast. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, I guess I'm reading them now, and I'm reading all those, and I'm reading his Justice League Dark, and I'm like, what's happening? who
Yeah.
who is this guy that just shows up out of nowhere and just kind of obliterates the doors on everything that I've known about comics? And Rom, I'm glad I've been able to talk to Rom because Rom just is such a wave of freshness
Yeah.
that I think at least the industry and a lot of times it kind of needed. And I don't think a lot of the bigger names acknowledge it yet, but I think they're gonna have to eventually.
I think Rom is the next big thing in comics.
Yeah.
If he's not already, like I don't
He's
read
writing so many books too. Like he
yeah.
himself said, I made too many. I've made too many books this year. I'm not going to do this next year when I talk to him.
Yeah, he's got the mini deaths of Layla Starr coming out soon.
Yeah, and he
Ish. Like
has that one from Vault coming out like a month later.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so
But
many.
these Savage Shores, just on another note, Sumit Kumar,
Yeah,
uh one of he has a page in the first issue of that book that you could hold up as an example of
yeah,
sequential storytelling. It's an act of total brilliance, and yeah, I love that book. I love that book a lot. Blue and Green blew my mind. I don't read as a rule of thumb. I don't buy any big two books in floppies. I'll buy them in trade if I hear
yeah,
really positive things, but I just don't do it because I'm one of those people that really wants a complete story. So
yeah. I
if
get that.
I yeah, so like I do pull Guardians of the Galaxy with Al Ewing on it, and so I do pull Guardians, but even with Guardians, just in the last 5 or 6 issues, there's been references to the last two big Marvel events,
Yeah,
and it's like I'm clearly missing something, and so
yeah,
I just don't buy them as a rule. But I was really tempted to get Justice League Dark because I love Rom. He's just gonna be he's got to be one of the one of the best writers working right now, and he'll likely be like our generation's greatest writer. He's fantastic.
yeah. Honestly, I would just say pick up the Swamp Thing because like that's the one I just want to see them get a season 2 on. Like I know Rom's calling it seasons, so I'm like,
Yeah.
even if you don't, if you just wanted to pick up one, I would just pick up Swamp Thing so we can guarantee that season 2.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I might grab that then.
Yeah, and honestly, Justice League Dark is the issue with Justice League Dark. I think grabbing it right now is it's a backup within Justice League, so you have to read Justice League,
uh,
which is fine. I think Bendis' Justice League is fine so far. Only one issue, and it's okay. It's nothing bad. But Swamp Thing is so encased in its own world, which is so and it's so fascinating because Ron gets to make his own character. He gets to make his own Swamp Thing, and so it's a whole new world plus the lore from previous Swamp Things, but it's his own new world that he gets to make at the big two. And I think whenever a creator gets that permission, it's a good time.
yeah, no, for sure. When they get that sort of level of freedom.
It's funny that you brought up these Savage Shores because it was a ROM taking something kind of common in all kinds of mythology, but really putting it in Indian lore. And you're doing that kind of with twin blades, of the idea of elemental powers and weapon and like people wielding blades, like Highlander's a thing, right? But you're putting that in Aztec and Mexican mythology, and I think that's super cool. And so it's good to see this trend continue. And I think because of it, these books are going to be big no matter what.
Yeah, I think, and there's just such a demand for stuff like that too. Like there's such a gap in like everybody knows Zeus, man.
Mm-hmm.
We've had like 1,000 Zeus stories. We've had like 101 Hercules stories or now or allegories or whatever. um I think the world's ready to like move past that mythos, and I would never in my life compare the twin blades to these Savage Shores, because the twin blades is really just me having a lot of fun. But that's because like I'm terrified of ever like judging myself next to a Rom V, you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I get that.
yeah, it's yeah, but you're right, like there's a similarity in concept, is that we took, you know, a mythos that isn't very popular, and we stuck a giant cyborg in it. And so we're taking these tropes and these genres that are sort of at home in different areas, and we're kind of folding it over into what we wanted to do with it. And so yeah, I think that there's definitely parallels there. Just don't buy the book expecting me to be as good of a writer as Rob V. Please don't do that. I'm not.
I back the book because I'm like, this looks like a lot of fun. That's the key
Yeah,
thing too, because
yeah,
I think there's also a lot of comics right now in the big two and the independent, which again I love all the ones I read. I read too many. Personally, it's an issue. But I think there's an element of fun missing from a good majority of them. They're telling great narratives, they're having amazing art, but they're not fun, if
right.
that makes sense. They're not like, there's not like a lot of just joy like coming out of these pages. um but your book seems like it's just gonna be a good time.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted. I was man, when I was writing Twin Blades, I just, like I said, I mean, we were doing Dryfoot stuff. Dryfoot's got some really heavy themes, and so I wanted something that I could just have a lot of fun writing. Um, I've got another book coming out this year that is a lot of fun as well. But my next two Kickstarter things are super heavy. Like they're going to be thematically really, really intense. And so that was one of the things that I really wanted to show readers and people who had read Dryfoot, is that like I can do other things. I can do plenty of different things, and we I can make stuff that's really fun that you can enjoy, and I can make stuff that's gonna break your heart and make you think and things like that. And so, uh, but yeah, Twin Blades is a really really fun, lighthearted time. It's really great.
My question is, after the Kickstarter is done, because it's fully funded right now, and I think you've hit most of your stretch goals, or have you hit all of them?
We had one stretch goal and we did not hit it, and I don't believe we are, and that's probably my fault. It was like a $7,500 stretch goal because it was going to be a micro anthology, and
Gotcha.
I think I went about that the wrong way. So that's something that I'm gonna have to take as a learning experience from this one. Um, but yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, but my question was like, after this Kickstarter is done and everybody has the book and everybody you got the responses from the book, do you plan on trying to get the book into a wider distribution? And like, because I'm thinking like Twin Blades being such a heritage based thing, it would be great to get it translated in everybody's hands as best as possible. Do you have any plans or thoughts about doing that at all?
Yeah, so I've had two publishers reach out, interested in distributing Twin Blades. So that's something that's being discussed. No one's obviously made a final decision.
Yeah.
They got to see the completed book, which is fair. Um, but the other thing we have to do is I really want to do a Spanish version of the book.
Yeah.
I would love to do a Spanish version, but yeah. So those conversations have been had. We just need to uh, send the book out and sort of finish it, and then send the book out and see where we go from there. Um, but yeah, though we've definitely had a couple of people that have talked to us about it. And yeah, hopefully we do get to do that.
And I think it's to be exciting too because I think the most fun thing, it's been a long time since I've done this. I don't know how much independent books get to these areas, but growing up, I read my comics mostly in the library. Um,
Mhm.
I would because I couldn't afford to buy single issues. I couldn't, and I wasn't going anywhere to buy trades, so I would go to the library and see what they had. That's where I read so much manga. That's where I read a ton of old comics, and it was just so fun to see Twin Blades show up and kind of in the library
Yeah.
and be like, "Hey, kids, you can read this work." And then they're like, "Who made this?" Like, it's not DC or Marvel. It's just someone with a passion.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that. My mom well, she teaches fourth grade now. Uh, and this is the one that doesn't have like Dryfoot cussed a lot, and so I couldn't put that one in there, but I'm kind of hoping that I can convince her to have this one in her classroom just because it's, I grew up 3 miles from the Mexican border, so
Yeah,
there's a lot of kids that could have some sort of interest in it and see that their culture is represented in a way that's not how they're typically used to seeing it. So yeah, I would love, I just did an interview with the Texas Library Association, as a matter of fact, for one of their conventions. And I love libraries. I hear a lot of stories about people reading comics from their local library. I heard a lot of those stories from uh, people during the COVID-19 when everything was locked down,
hmm
wherever it was. Anyway, it was never really locked down in Texas, but uh, so that sort of stuff, I really, really, I would love to do anything like that, in terms of getting that in there.
and to put Twin Blades on a higher pedestal and kind of expand your view on it. Uh, Live action or animated? What would you want to see it be developed into?
Live action, but that's only because I want someone to convince Diego Luna to play the villain.
Okay, I mean that's fair. That's how it's done because it seems like a live action, especially for independent things, it's always like I really just want this one actor to play my character. I really want him to. I really want him to be that, and I think that's totally fair.
Yeah, I think like I saw someone say that Diego Luna should play Basilio, who's our protagonist, our male protagonist. And I was like, no, man, like he's got to play the bad guy. We got to give him a robot arm and a cloak and shit. Like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to
Oh,
cuss. Sorry.
you're okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would love that. That would be my whole joint right there.
Who
I
was
don't
playing
really
the hero then?
I'm sorry.
Who would play the hero then?
I don't know. Because they've got to, I think like um I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think there's enough Latina actresses for me to like know off the top of my head. I'm literally looking it up right now because I feel guilty. Um but I can see that I've looked this up before because oh my god. The girl from Knives Out,
Oh,
is
yes,
already
yes, yeah.
right
Oh
there.
God,
Oh my
what's her
god.
name? It's on like the
I'm
tip
gonna
of my tongue because I
I
saw her face
know.
everywhere. Gosh, she's gonna be in the new James Bond movie too.
I'm gonna find out. I'm on IMDb. It's okay.
I'm searching with you. I'm seeing if I can get to it. Uh, Anna de
Annie de
Armas.
Armas.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
who it is. Okay.
Yeah, that would be Xiomara. She would be perfect. Now that I'm looking at her. In terms of the male lead, I don't even know. I used to all the Spanish movies that I know were from like the early 2000s, and they were really, really weird indie movies because that's where is it Gabriel something like Sin Nombre and Y Tu Mama También and stuff like that. Movies like that, but they're like no, I don't know any of those guys.
Yeah.
I don't think Latino actors are allowed to ever be young either, because like it's like oh John Leguizamo and stuff like that. I'm like oh no, no, Cheech is on this list, so that's definitely not an option.
Not to sound like just someone who explores different cultures, but I think that's the most fun thing I have too, though, is watching the weird, strange like B movies from just different backgrounds and different cultures. Because I've been watching I have the Criterion thing. I've been watching a lot of Japanese noir, and it's just one of my favorite things to do is just to see how it's done, because I feel like the idea of weird movies has kind of died here in the US.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure you've seen it before, but have you ever seen Pan's Labyrinth?
Yeah, one of my favorite Del Toro ones next to the most recent one. Gosh, what's that one called?
Shape of Water?
Shape of Water. Like those two are like I love the Hellboy movies, but those two stand differently for me.
Yeah, yeah. And then also the Diego Boneta, I'm looking at him right now. He is super handsome, but that would be my choice. I have never seen him in anything, but that's the guy that I'm gonna go for. Oh
I
man, dude,
think that works.
Latino actors are like super good looking dudes, man. Wow. All right, go
Yeah,
ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I am in the boat that we should have more Latino actors and more just Asian and Pacific Islander actors in
All right.
things, because gosh, they're just attractive and they should be stars more. Like I was
Yeah,
celebrating today that because I've been talking to all my friends like the Warrior. I've been watching Warrior on HBO. I was like, oh, man,
mhm.
I'm bummed that this isn't going to get a season 3. And then like 5 friends texted me today. It's like, hey, did you just got announced this is getting a season 3? I'm like, good. Everybody deserves to be in that show.
I had not watched Warrior, but I saw a bunch of my friends getting excited uh for it. And so I'm gonna definitely have to I'm gonna have to look it up.
I
Just
would
because
love more. I just would love more shows like that that just have a focused cast like that and just do cool stuff. I just want more cool
yeah.
stuff from different people.
I think it's like strange how, well, it's not strange, right? There's like a purpose but why there's so few actors and actresses of color.
Yeah,
But I like I the girl from Knives Out that we just talked about, like
yeah,
she's phenomenal. She
she's
was phenomenal
amazing.
in Knives
Yeah,
Out. Yeah. And it's like, how are you not like how are you not in more movies? And especially with like I think that like the last statistic is like Latino is, or Latin population is like 30% of the American population. Like how are we not a third of
yeah.
Hollywood's people, you know?
And I
But
would
it was
like
a good year
to.
for us.
I would like to say things are shifting because it does feel like that from time to time. But then you look at the Oscars this year and like I guess they're not
Oh yeah.
shifting and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
you want to hope that like popular opinion is eventually going to shift into that swing, but might
As
be
long
a
as
few more
we've got
years.
as long as we've got Pedro Pascal, you know, we can get through with or anything as
I
long
mean,
as we have Pedro in there.
I saw his Law and Order episode recently just because it was on TV, and I'm like, man, even back then he was just giving his all and everything.
Yeah, yeah, I love that man. He's fantastic. I think my wife and I watch The Mandalorian like religiously. I
Yeah,
think my wife has seen The Mandalorian probably like 100 times. But he's so fantastic, and just his voice, and then whenever he does take the helmet off, and it's so intense, and he's such a good talented actor. Yeah, I love that guy.
I want to move into some question and answer from people who asked some questions for you for this episode.
Okay.
Um, Raphael on Twitter asks, he said he supported the Kickstarter, but he wanted to ask these questions to you. He asked,
Mhm.
when writing the story, was there any big problem that you had to figure out before you were able to sit down and write the first draft?
um yeah, there was a recurring problem that I didn't really solve it. I thought I had solved it at the time. I really like villains that maybe aren't good people, and or they're not, you know, good people that have gone wrong somewhere, but that they have a dimension to them.
Yeah,
And our villain Yautu is in a pretty complicated situation himself. It's not the easiest spot for him to be in. He's certainly not a good person, but I really was kind of dead set on exploring why he was in this era that he was in. Why was he in this spot he was in? And that was something that I kind of had to, for the first draft, he was a pretty basic villain. He had a motivation, and that was the thing that we had to click, right? It can't
hmm
just be a resurrected jaguar warrior with cyborg arms and stuff. we've got to find a reason for why he is the way he is at some point, you know? And it wasn't until art had started and I was doing a lettering pass that it really clicked for me as to what Yauto's purpose was and what his the things that he's gone through and what's led him here. And so that got me to more touching on themes of regret, regret, and what would you do to fix the biggest mistake of your life,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what I ended up exploring with him. So yeah, and I ended up I figured that out in the lettering pass, which I did for the first 28 pages. And as I was doing that, I changed the ending. And so I had to like email Julio and be like, hey, I changed the ending to the book. Please take a look at it so you don't draw the first ending because I'm stupid. I'm sorry.
And that kind of like, just to pick your brain as a writer, um I feel like there's a fine line, and there's a few superhero things that have done it, and it seems like they're doing it now with making your characters right, but trying to portray them as the bad guy from making them right. If
Yeah.
that makes sense. And so when you're writing a villain or writing an antagonist to your protag, do you put a fine? You put like a do you put a firm line? It's like, I cannot make them this, because if I do that, then they're not the villain anymore. Or do you let yourself play in a gray area with that?
I'm very gray. I'm stupendously gray. I think that good villains are people that we can at least understand. We don't have to agree um with our villains. We don't have to say, like, oh, genocide. We all know genocide's wrong,
Yeah,
but what I want to explore is feelings and thoughts and emotions that connect the reader with the villain. So you don't, yeah, obviously genocide's wrong, but you can understand regret. You can understand making a mistake that's haunting you.
yeah,
You can understand that. But um, one of my favorite things to do is to make the villain objectively correct. But our hero is the one that's changed by the end of the story. You know, I think that's one of the a trick I haven't been able to really show yet is that your villain can be right and still lose,
yeah,
and your hero can make that realization.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I like that bit a lot, and I think Watchmen is probably the most famous one to do that. That uh, dark without like diving into the Watchmen.
the
There's like a
complexity of Watchmen.
yeah, there's definitely like a lot of correct concerns there. Even in something more simple like Batman versus Superman. Um, Batman is while he isn't like a cold cut villain, he's definitely the antagonist to Superman. He's
Yeah,
definitely looking for a fight, and the way that he views this threat is 100. You can totally understand why why Bruce Wayne wouldn't in that movie for whatever for all of its faults would not trust, or why anyone would trust something like Superman in that
yeah,
sort of events. So there's things like that I think are really important. I don't really like there's lines I don't cross in terms of uh, what I want to present to the reader, but like I don't want to offend anybody for the sake of doing it. I want it
yeah,
to be rooted somewhere. But no, I think that morally gray, not just antagonists but protagonists, are the way that I think is better to go. Like nobody ever starts off good, and nobody ever is bad permanently. Like
yeah, for
everybody
sure.
changes throughout their life, and that's kind of something I like to explore more than anything.
Raphael had a second part of this question though, is with
Mhm.
with him, research can be a long process, and he was wondering, do you ever get caught up on big questions of mythology, or do you ever get lost in your research?
I get lost in research all the time, like all the time. the twin blades, I've been studying Aztec mythology since I was like before I was even a teenager. It's been something that was really common with my not the mythos, but our my family's legacy as descendants of Aztec people is something that was brought up pretty openly and regularly in when I was growing up. So like my grandmother in particular, and so it almost feels like I've been doing research for this story for like 15 years, you know, or 20 years, I guess would be better. So, but with this one, what was difficult is trying to get the personality of the gods right.
Yeah.
Why does so and so feel this way, you know? And is that in tune with their personality in the mythos, in the greater mythos? Are we representing them accurately? And so that was kind of tricky. When I was trying to figure out the central plot of like what was Yaotu trying to do is I wanted to root that into some more mythos stuff, and that was really hard. But and that's when I got really bogged down in the mythology to the point that I kind of simplified it because I kind of stepped away from the mythology and gave it a different sort of direction. Uh, because that one I was like, man, everything I want to do it has like some next layer, and I don't want to do something that doesn't make any sense in regards to mythology. And so yeah, that was a hole that I dug myself into. But I was doing research for a story about that involved a character who had lost a limb, and they lost the limb in the story. And I spent like probably 2 or 3 days looking up bionic arms and how they function, and people's the varied beliefs and thoughts in them,
Yeah.
uh, and how disabled people feel about these arms, and because it's a very diverse topic amongst that community. And then I ended up scrapping it altogether. I was like, I'm just not going to put that in there because I felt really doubtful of my ability to tell that sort of that angle of the story without being without telling it poorly and it coming across as something offensive. So I just scrapped it. But I spent like hours trying to figure out how to do it correctly, how to do it respectfully, and then I just was afraid that I couldn't pull it off in a way, and so I just stepped away from it altogether. But yeah, it's something I think research is my favorite part as a writer because I really like reading, I really like learning. Scripting is my least favorite part.
And honestly, I have massive respect for you, like doing all that research and going, you know what, I can't do this, and then like just putting it away.
Yeah, the thing that I always try and tell myself is that I won't name anybody's book, but I read a comic that involved a Mexican character that I was like grossly. It was a Mexican character, and it was set in along the border, and it was so grossly exaggerated
Yeah.
and stupid and a complete misunderstanding of not of our culture and of how we are as people. And I was like, yeah, so my whole I always go back to that, is that I don't want to invoke that feeling in other people. I want to make my books diverse. I want to make them uh, including disabled people and all of that stuff. But if I can't tell it, then if I can't tell it in a way that I trust isn't respectful and inclusive as I want it to be, then yeah, I was like, okay, is it absolutely vital to the story? Can I change the story to not include it so that I don't have to worry about doing that? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. And so I just scrapped it.
The next question I have for you is, what is the hardest part about running this Kickstarter? Like, what was the hardest thing that you had to deal with?
I had to make a spreadsheet. um, I hate Excel, but I made a no. I think the hardest part of it is really just keep, it's promoting every day, right?
Yeah.
So you gotta bump it all the time, uh, and you always worry that you're gonna annoy somebody, but it's just kind of the name of the game, and so you just do it. But the other things like that, managing the project is a whole different job. Like, or orchestrating everybody's schedules, making sure everything's ready before it goes to another person, uh, things like that. And on top of my duties as a writer is pretty rough. Fortunately, I have an editor working on me with me on the next one, so I will hopefully not be as responsible for for that sort of organization skills for the next one. But yeah, man, like doing the budgets, figuring out the printing. Like I've never done the printing side of comics before, so that was another thing I had to figure out. And fortunately, I have like a dozen friends who have all done comic Kickstarters successfully. So I was able to reach out to my friends and get help on printing. But it's managing the Kickstarter, promoting the Kickstarter, managing your budget, making sure everybody's on time, making sure there's your script is still good, doing lettering passes. Yeah, it sucks.
That does lead into my last question for you though, is like like for what you can say about it, what's next? What's next for you? What's the next Kickstarter? Like what's the next thing?
So, oh, man, I have so many things. I the most immediate thing is I have stories in Yule, uh, which is on Kickstarter right now, and it's a bunch of pre-commercialized Christmas mythos uh, about the winter solstice, and I have another Aztec horror story in there. I've also got a story in Off into the Sunset, a story. It's a book, another anthology curated by my buddy Brett Harshman, and that one's got like a both books have like a crazy amount of talent. Yule and Off into the Sunset are awesome. I think if you're into comics, that's if you're into comics and you're into indie comics, you got to back both of those, even if it's just digital. Man, you got to get your hands on those because they're going to be really good. Um, and then I have a new miniseries that I cannot talk about. I believe it's going to be announced next month.
Sweet. I
Um,
mean, as long as people keep
yeah,
watching, they'll find out.
yeah. So in hopefully about 2 weeks that'll get announced at the beginning of May, and that one's really cool, really big sci-fi. It's kind of me making fun of superheroes and masculinity, but I think people are going to really dig it. It's got a lot of punchy punch, so it's plenty fun. Um, and then my next Kickstarter is in September. It looks
Sweet.
like, yeah. I have a
Yeah.
couple things between. There's another thing I can't talk about that's going to be out next month, but I am not allowed to talk about that. It's not a miniseries, but just keep an eye out.
That is like a lot of people will like talk about how they hate when they listen to something or like, oh, the writer didn't tell us anything, like it's all secrets. I'm like, that's my favorite thing because I secrets mean it's good stuff. If you usually
Yeah,
spill the beans about it, it's not something you're super excited about.
I am not like I'm not good at keeping secrets. I don't want to keep them. I want
Yeah,
to tell people what I'm working on all the time, but it's a marketing thing. They want to make sure that their people, and I guess a trademark thing is what I had read too. Um, but yeah, I have a bunch of anthology stuff. But yeah, the next mini series I'm is going to be out. It's going to start. It's going to be in previews. Hopefully next month. I'm always
sweet.
confused as to how previews works. um, but yeah, it's going to be out. It's going to be dope. I'm really excited for that one.
Jared, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. Where can people find you on Twitter to follow all you the Kickstarter and the announcements and stuff?
Yeah, so at Jared Lujan, it's just at JARREDLUJAN. That's my Twitter and my Instagram handle. You'll see me post from both of those pretty regularly. I'm a lot more regular with Twitter. I like Twitter. Um, so yeah, follow me on those, and then you can always go to my website, which is Lujan Lujan Writes WRITES.com, and I have a plenty of cool stuff. I have free comics up there that are probably not going to be there in about another week. I have to update my website, and then I've also got a link there to my newsletter. I send out a newsletter on the first of every month, and it's just kind of sneak peeks of what I'm working on. Everybody who is in my newsletter has already been told uh, a general gist of what my next Kickstarter is going to be about. So if you like secrets and if you hate secrets and you want to be in on them, my newsletter is the way to go.
There we go. And then you can follow this show on Twitter at Comics Matter Pod, Facebook at facebook.com/Comics Matter. You can email me at comicsmatter@gmail.com. And if you have any question for a guest, want to be a future guest on the show, or just have a story about how comic books have impacted your life, you can reach me at all of those places. Please leave a review and tell a friend if you like the show. And the logos for the show are done by Andy Manley and my friend Steven. And lastly, the theme is Join the Restaurant by David Szesztay. Remember, everybody, even Captain America punched Nazis.